I wrote a do-it-yourself guide, 27 tips to rocking the resume, and started doing a few Zooms. And I've been very fortunate to have some great coaches and leadership consultants, heads of HR, and others. And today I'm particularly pleased with my guest, Christina Kennedy. She has, I think, a great title, a talent acquisitions consultant. She partners with high growth and innovative companies and leaders and works with them to try to figure out the best organizational plan for them, and focus with a particular focus on people needs. She's one of the best at building a team from the ground up. Most recently, she was consulting with Fanatics, a sports merchandising company, and she's also done executive recruiting for Warner Media, helping various divisions within the company such as HBO Max and Otter Media, Crunchyroll, and Rooster Teeth. I'll have to ask you later how they come up with these names. And last but not least, before that, she worked with Lloyd Braun and Jeff Berman at Whale Rock, where she helped put together an incredible team for them during a time of very significant expansion. But she's with us today because she loves coaching people on negotiation and finding a job. And so let's just get to it. So welcome, Christina.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure.
Thank you. So I want to start off and talk about networking. A lot of people ask me, what's the best way to network? Are there any tips? And there's a lot of conversation about this. There's kind of a right way to do it and a wrong way. And so I want to start off by asking your opinion on that and how someone should go about it, particularly with the pandemic going on.
Yeah, it's a good question. And it is an important thing to focus on right now. I think that not everyone is comfortable with networking. And so I like to reframe it as connecting. So for those of us who aren't necessarily comfortable with networking, maybe if you just look at it a little bit differently and you reach out to people who you've loved working with in the past, you've loved partnering with, and this is actually a perfect opportunity to kind of email people, reach out to people and ask how they're doing from a very authentic place. And oftentimes I like to reach out to people even when there's not something when there's not an ask involved, just to kind of check in and say, gosh, things are crazy right now. You came to mind as I'm working on my search. And I thought, as I think about people I love working for or with, it was you. And I just wanted to make sure that you and your family are doing well.
Oh, I like that.
It's a very it's authentic. It's connecting. It's not asking of anything, because truly networking is meant to be an equal exchange, which oftentimes it feels like it's not. It feels like you're asking. So I think that it just rounds it out a little bit better. But I think it's a great opportunity to reach out to people and check in and make sure everyone's doing well. And then you become top of mind for them, which is key.
Right. Which is key.
Yeah.
I like what you said. It has to be sincere. I like that it's not just the same old "hope you're safe and well," line that too many people have used, but something that you said really resonated with me, and that's about checking in. I know so many of us, whether we're working or not working, a lot of people are very busy, particularly the people that you might want to network with. Mm-hmm. So I find sometime when people are like, hey, let's get together and catch up, it's not quite, catching up takes too much time, but checking in to me is the perfect phrase. Do you agree?
I do agree. And I think it's also nice to share a little bit about, you can say, I'm checking in to make sure that you're doing well. Mm-hmm. I am, and give a little bit, a one sentence update on what's happening with you. And based on your specific relationship with that person, you can share more or less, you know what's comfortable for you. But in my perspective, there's not really a right or wrong way of networking. You just have to make sure that it feels authentic and it's true to who you are. Yep. And those people that you're reaching out to will know that. They'll know whether it's genuine or not.
Absolutely agree. So now let's talk about getting your resume in order. And some people are like, well, why even bother? These unemployment figures are so high. And I try to encourage them that now is actually the perfect time to get things in order, because a lot of companies are doing some major restructuring. So tell us what your thoughts are on that.
Yes, I totally agree with you. I think that there's so much that's out of our control right now. So if we focus on what we do have control over,
Mm.
And that is getting ourselves prepared. That means researching the companies that we're interested in, researching industries, working on our resume. How do we better brand ourselves? How do we better articulate our skills and our return on investment and the things that we've done? I think that if you make that your project right now, because things may not happen as fast as you'd like them to, so use this time to your benefit. Again, it's about reframing and
Mm.
really, really, using the time that you have to be better prepared.
Is this also a good time, do you think, to figure out what you might want to do next? Because some people may have been unhappy in their jobs, and maybe this is the perfect opportunity to really kind of focus on reinvention.
If you're truly, if you weren't happy prior to the pandemic and the changes that have came to us, but I think that, it goes back to do what you love. What are your strengths, and kind of poking around at different industries that really make you light up. And that does take work. It means researching and listening to how you get excited about something, or ask your friends and family, when I'm talking about certain things, do you see me light up when I'm talking about one thing more than the other? Ask our communities around us that know us really well and start really tapping into that. One thing I want to be mindful of is there's a lot of people right now that weren't necessarily unhappy prior to this, but are finding that they're not as engaged right now. And I think that can be there's a distinction I'm finding with the people around me. Is I think that a lot of people, even if they are employed and very busy, are still finding themselves to be a little bit less engaged. And I think that that's also layered. You think about the circumstances that we're in and the environment that we're in. It's something to be mindful of for those people who are working, who were happy prior to all of this, and all of a sudden they're like, well, now I want to make a change. All good indicators to explore further, as far as, do I need to have more of a purpose-filled job, which a lot of people are saying right now, and to explore that further. But I think that it comes down to, you got to do the research and listen to what makes you excited. And typically what makes us excited, we're good at.
You're right, because it doesn't feel like work, if we're passionate about it. But that's interesting you say that during this sort of downtime, even though it hasn't really been relaxing, people are thinking, well, maybe now that I really have time to think about it, was I happy? Like, now we finally have a minute to take a beat and question what we were doing. Well, along those lines, and speaking about happiness on the job, when we spoke earlier, you said something that really stuck with me. And so I'd like if you could explain. You were explaining the difference between builders and maintenance. Can you talk a little about that and that distinction? Because I found it to be really interesting, and something that I think people would be fascinated to hear.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different industries, and then within those industries, you have different stages of growth. And typically, when you have a smaller company that's higher growth, you tend to hire builders. And builders, when you're in a startup phase, it requires people who are very flexible, who can pivot and change really quickly, because the business does as you're learning and growing. They hire generalists who don't necessarily need to stay in their lane. They're required to do many different jobs. Typically, it requires more hours, a lot more energy. The pace is fun and sometimes chaotic. Builders see a problem and don't wait for the problem to be brought to their attention. They identify it and want to come up with solutions immediately, and it's just part of their DNA. They're constantly, when they go into a new organization, they can be relied on to look at, status quo is not working, this is what I recommend. And they thrive in that kind of environment. And they thrive in an environment where you can also make mistakes, because when you're building, you're going to make mistakes. And so if you're a perfectionist, it's challenging, because you're going to make mistakes and have to reiterate, and try again. I think that when I say maintenance, I mean more as you become a more mature organization, organizations tend to hire specialists, and specialists can still have a component of builders in them, as you can look at like building a team. There's probably a team already in place, but maybe they're doing a reorg, or maybe they do have that sense of wanting to problem solve, but it's a there's a distinction between somebody who's comfortable in a culture that is so fast paced and in a building stage, and then somebody who's coming into an organization where the building has already happened, and now they're maintaining it and tweaking it and fine tuning it, definitely pivoting, but it's not as fast paced typically.
Right.
So it's a good thing for people to kind of, be self-aware and ask yourself, what kind of environment do I thrive in? Do I like the security and the consistency of a company that changes, but not as quickly? And, or do I get bored in that environment? Do I need things to be growing and fast and pivoting and being given the opportunity in this space to fix things? Because a lot of times larger organizations, you see that it's broken, but you're not empowered to fix it.
If you find yourself put into a chaotic builder type of environment, naturally you're going to be unhappy and it's not going to be what you're best suited for.
Exactly.
And conversely, if you're a builder and then you're somehow tied down to something and you see everyone else making decisions and you're just itching to do this because you have that entrepreneurial fire, if you will, then I think that's going to be a clear indication of job unhappiness as well. So I really like this distinction that you have made for us, because I think we need to think about what we are. It doesn't mean that we're one or the other. We can have elements of both.
Exactly.
But I think you definitely have a strong muscle group for one. You agree?
I totally agree. And I think that's also something that companies are being mindful as they're hiring, because it is important to set people up for success. And so when people are asking you your comfort level, I think that, I think that we have to do the work individually on where we thrive. We know what our comfort level is and where we thrive. And so it's our responsibility not to force ourselves into an environment. Yes, force yourself into an environment where you'll grow and expand, and you want to be out of your comfort. You want to be uncomfortable to grow. But you can also know intuitively where you actually thrive. And I think that hiring is becoming a lot more sophisticated and making sure that they do hire to your strengths and and where you would thrive. So it's important to manage that so that you're set up for success.
I love it. Now, also, there's a lot of people that I know that work for a studio or network, and to our earlier point about maybe being a little unhappy in their job, and they think, oh, I just want to work for a streamer. That just sounds super fun and exciting. And, and when I ask them, well, why? They're not exactly sure. They just know it's different. And it seems like it's just seems like it's more exciting and the new thing. But I want to kind of do a little bit of a deep dive into this, because you're so familiar with this area, having worked at Warner Brothers, having worked for both traditional companies and tech companies and recruited for both. And so I have a two-pronged question. The first is, when recruiting for both, are you looking for different kinds of individuals? And can you talk to us about the cultural difference between, for example, a Warner Brothers and an HBO Max? Because I find that there are distinct cultural differences between traditional and tech companies. Do you agree?
I do agree. The good news is those companies need both. So even though there's a distinction, for the most part, you still need a combination of people who have worked for I have seen it work beautifully, where there's people who have experience in traditional media and then digital media or new media, and those worlds have intertwined. I saw it work at Whale Rock. It was an interesting combination there, because they originally were, they're traditional media, and then the digital piece was born. But I think that there is a different culture within those organizations and a different pace. The pace is different. And I think that, again, as a recruiter, I'm asking you what you want and what you're interested in. And if I'm really listening to you, I'll get a sense of which space might be the best for you. And it's not one size fits all. So some of the tech companies are not going to be as fast paced, and some of them have been around a little longer now. So a lot of those nuances and that need to pivot and those days have kind of, they're focused now on hiring specialized people who are definitely more maintenance. And so it's not just looking at the industries or digital versus traditional, but it's also looking at how long the company's been around, the size of the company. And I don't want to discourage anyone if somebody's been in traditional media and they're interested in moving into digital or the technology space. I just think that the things to be mindful of is oftentimes the pace is different, which might suit you.
So when I've worked for a number of studios, and you're taught early on that stay in your lane, do what you do. You've got your sandbox. If you have an idea for someone else, there's a way to do that, but not at a big meeting. And we're just kind of ingrained into all working together, but being very mindful of our territory. And yet I find with the streamers, and of course I'm generalizing, it's much messier. It feels like everybody's in everybody's business, and it seems that there's a lot of overlap. And by the way, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think through that chaos is sometimes how the best ideas are born in the tech world. So will you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I absolutely agree with that. And I can give some examples, even from my time at Hulu. I remember it was very common to hear the expectation for raising your hand to solve a problem was across the board. It didn't matter if you were an assistant. It didn't matter if you were a vice president. Everyone had that responsibility to raise their hand and to have a point of view. And if you were in a meeting where there wasn't a point of view to be shared, then one might ask, do you need to be in that meeting? So it really was a self-correcting, self-directing kind of environment where you were empowered. And that empowerment comes with responsibility to raise your hand and be okay with the fact that people may not agree with you. And that's where innovation comes from, is disagreeing, and that can be messy and uncomfortable. But I think that someone would argue that that's where a lot of really wonderful things are created. So it's not comfortable by any means, but to your point, I definitely have seen that.
Right. I think that's a good distinction. And also one more thing too, with the tech companies, I find that you're right. No matter what your level is, everyone has a voice, has an opinion, but also and the pace is different, as you said. But I also feel like that sometimes there aren't offices, there's not desks, you don't have that standard structure that maybe existed within a studio. And if that is important to you, if having your space, if that traditional way of working is important, I think it's okay to admit that to ourselves and just be conscious of it, because to throw ourselves into a situation where that might not be the case, I think it's going to be quite an adjustment, and maybe not the easiest, particularly if people have been working in that way for many years. Do you agree?
It's true. And I can speak to, I've had both. when I was working at Paramount, I had an office. And then when I went to Hulu, I was exposed. And which is not uncommon for recruiters, I'm an introvert. So if you put me in a situation where I'm constantly being stimulated over and over again in a very exposed, like, cubicle area, I go home and I'm exhausted. Some people thrive in that. And so it's a balance of knowing what works for you and what doesn't work for you. I adapted to it. And that's the wonderful thing about, we all adapt. So, some of us adapt easier than others. But that's a very good point, because it's okay to be, it's okay if you prefer one over the other. It's totally okay.
Let's talk about the waiting game. It's a tough thing. And so many people, when they're looking for a job and they have a great interview, maybe 2 or 3 great interviews, or maybe it's one of those, getting back to the tech companies, where it's like an all-day type of thing with many, many, many people. And then you wait, then you hear nothing. And then you wait. Why is it that hiring on the tech side it seems like I don't know, it just seems like many people have to wait longer than in the traditional world.
I'm finding that it's slow across the board right now. And I think that my experience in tech is that they definitely tend to hire fast. This is a different moment in the world that we're in right now, for sure. but I can speak to like generally all of the kinds of roles that I'm seeing, and even with clients of mine and getting responses back. I think that, well, one, it doesn't feel good when you've given them your time and then they don't follow up with you. So, and I'm sure it's not something that I try as a recruiter to always make sure I get back to people, but I haven't on occasion. And so I know what it feels like also on the other end of it. What I'm having to be really mindful of and remind people that I'm coaching and consulting is that a lot of these organizations, even though they have a lot of open roles, are being told, and what happens when you're within an organization, you have these roles posted because you know that you're going to need them soon. But sometimes what's happening behind the scenes is they're like asking you to drag your feet because they're waiting for numbers to be, the budget to be approved, or they're waiting for, but they still want it out there. They want you to talk to people, but they're not ready to pull the trigger yet. And so something that might be helpful for people when they're applying for jobs is there's so much happening behind the scenes. And right now what's happening behind the scenes is a wait and see. A lot of companies we're doing fine financially. We feel good about where we are right now. We want to hire these roles, but let's wait and see what happens in the next couple of weeks. And so I think a lot of companies are doing that. My recommendation and my advice to people is follow up. I would be careful how often you follow up, because the reality is everyone is so busy right now and doing the best they can for the most part. But I also think it might be helpful to know that it's not really personal at all, that sometimes there's just more happening behind the scenes. And I know I've been in places where I have felt it's unfortunate that I can't communicate to the candidate things that are happening behind the scenes, because I'm also an advocate for the company, and it may not mean that the company's in a bad place. It very rarely means that. It just means that they're trying to work through the numbers and feel confident. They're being mindful about their hiring, and so sometimes it slows things down.
You mentioned about don't follow up too much. I have the don't follow up more than 3 rule. Do you agree?
I do agree.
And space it out. And again, but be always just extremely understanding, and never, not even a tiny bit of anger that you haven't heard back. Because also within the tech world, I found that you may not hear, and then 5 months from now, they get back to you, or they have something else for you. Like those resumes don't just go away.
This is true. And one of the wonderful things that I have seen in the tech space that I think will be encouraging is that oftentimes we're asked to think outside of the box for our hiring. So it's not about just filling the specific scope of the role. We might talk to you and think you're not right for this role, but what role would you be good for? And do we have the means to create that role for you? Like there's a lot more, you can be a little bit more flexible, and which goes to the culture as well, being flexible, adapting, and oftentimes that also translates into how they hire. So to your point, absolutely, if you don't hear from them right away, oftentimes we're like, actually this new role or this new need or this new problem we need to solve, this person I spoke to 2 months ago, I think would be awesome for that. So it does happen. It does happen.
Before we wrap it up, I want to ask you 2 more things. One about diversity and inclusion, and are these initiatives really becoming a priority? I feel like they are, but what are you seeing and hearing out there? And can you shed any light on this?
I'm seeing the same. I'm hopeful. If you look on LinkedIn, I live on LinkedIn. There are so many roles open for heads of diversity and inclusion. A lot of my peers and prior bosses and clients are talking to me about how do they start approaching the conversation internally? How do they start approaching hiring differently? All of those conversations are going to be uncomfortable and important and critical. And I think even the companies who made it a priority before are realizing they didn't make it enough of a priority. And so all of that is being fine-tuned. I think that it's going to take a little longer than we would like it to happen right away. But I think I do have hope, and I am. The conversations are happening everywhere around me within HR and recruiting, and I feel so proud to be in the space that I'm in, to be able to make an impact, and also to be of influence to other people who want to be an impact. And so, yeah, I remain very optimistic, but I think it's going to be we got to push, we got to, keep working at it.
And it's great that someone in your position that helps build these teams from the ground up, or goes in and kind of fills the holes where there might be, that you have that in mind, and that if it's a priority for you and a priority for the company, then we will see the change. I mean, it all happens from higher up.
It does. I think organizations are going to have to, it's going to take longer, maybe sometimes, when they look at hiring, because I think that you're going to have to change. There's a lot of things that need to be evaluated and changed.
Right.
But I think the difference right now is that people are willing to make that investment, because there's no choice at this point. Like it's
happening. Right.
We have to.
Right.
And if you don't, my optimistic belief is you'll be left behind. I really do think that we're most of us are just foot on the pedal.
Yeah, that's good. It makes me feel better.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to ask you, when I did this 27 tips for your resume, I put in there, one of my tips, number 15, my favorite, was about, until you find something, think about consulting. Just if you're good at something and you don't want to just sit around waiting, as we said, for that phone call, it might take a few months, consult, get a couple clients, do that. Not only does it keep you busy, but it keeps you out there and engaged with the industry, if you will. And I wondered what your thoughts were about consulting until you find something.
I'm a fan. I've done it. If you look at my background, Whale Rock, for example, they were a client of mine. They were a client of mine twice before I went in-house. And for me, it's a great opportunity to get to know the culture and the people. For me, as you guys look at how to identify new jobs or new companies, like for me, I can just speak to my own experience. I always look for companies that are innovative, leaders that I think are high valued in integrity, and that are high growth. Those are the three things as when I'm looking at clients that I want to work with or partner with, or companies I want to work for. And sometimes it's meaningful for me to consult with them first. And if I'm adding value, and I'm getting exposure and sometimes new experience. Fanatics, I didn't have experience with apparel, zero. But I had someone who knew and believed in me and hired me to partner with them, and I learned really quickly. And now I might say that I'm, an expert in that space. Feels a little uncomfortable to say, but I think that I feel very confident in that space.
Right.
And so it's a great place to use the skills and strengths that you already have, and get some great experience. And you never know, they could convert you. A lot of companies do.
Right. Oh, that's good advice. I love it. Well, thank you so much for your time today, being with us. And I just think your builder and maintenance story was great. And it really gives us something to think about in terms of making sure that we're in the job that our skill set suits us and matches. So